The mansion on the hill was larger than any building in town. Its walls were made of glass that shone under the sun, and its gates were made of steel that seemed too heavy for any ordinary person to open. People in the streets often pointed toward it and whispered. Everyone knew who lived there. It was the home of Mr. Rowland, a billionaire who owned businesses across the country. Mr. Rowland was not only known for his money, but also for his sharp words. He liked to remind people that he was above them, and many feared speaking in his presence. To him, life was a game where only the strong survived. He had no patience for weakness, and he believed the poor were poor because they were not clever enough. Inside this mansion worked Maria, a maid who had served Mr. Rowland for years. She lived a quiet life and avoided trouble. Maria had a daughter named Lila, a bright young girl with eyes full of curiosity. Sometimes after school, Lila would come to the mansion to wait for her mother to finish her work. She would sit in the kitchen, read books, or wander around quietly, never disturbing anyone. One sunny afternoon, the mansion was alive with noise. Mr. Rowland had invited a group of wealthy business partners and friends. Expensive cars lined the driveway and laughter echoed through the halls. The grand dining room was full of people dressed in fine suits and silk gowns. Servants hurried back and forth carrying trays of food and drinks. Mr. Rowland stood at the center of attention. He enjoyed entertaining his guests by telling stories of his victories in business and his clever tricks. His deep voice carried across the room as he spoke of power, wealth, and success. "Life is simple," he said proudly. "There are winners and there are losers. Some are born to serve and some are born to rule. Look around you. The proof is here." The guests clapped and laughed. Some nodded in agreement. Others raised their glasses in salute. To them, Mr. Rowland's words sounded like the truth. In that moment, Lila entered the room carrying a tray of empty glasses back to the kitchen for her mother. She had hoped no one would notice her, but Mr. Rowland's eyes caught her movement. His lips curled into a smile. He always liked to mock those he believed were beneath him, and this was the perfect chance to do so in front of his guests. "And here we have the maid's daughter," he said loudly, pointing toward her. "Tell me, child, do you think someone like you can ever stand where I stand? Do you believe you can outsmart a man like me?" The guests turned to look at her. Some expected her to lower her head in silence, others waited for her to flee in fear. But Lila stood still. Her heart beat faster, yet she did not turn away. She lifted her chin and answered, "Maybe not today, but anyone can rise if they try." The room fell silent for a moment. Then gasps spread across the hall. A maid's daughter had spoken back to the richest man in the city. Some guests looked amused, others looked shocked, and Maria, standing nearby, felt her hands tremble. Mr. Rowland burst into loud laughter. He slapped his hand on the table, shaking with amusement. "What spirit," he said mockingly. "Very well. Let us test your words. If you can beat me in a challenge, I will give you $100 million. Everyone stared at him in surprise. The offer was too large to believe. To the guests, it was only a joke. There was no way a young girl could win against him. "What challenge?" Lila asked, her voice steady. Mr. Rowland leaned back in his chair, his grin wide. "A game of chess," he declared. "One match, one chance. If you win, the money is yours. If you lose, you will admit that people like you are meant to serve people like me." Excited whispers filled the room. The idea of such a game thrilled the guests. A child playing against a billionaire was something they never expected to see. Maria rushed forward and whispered to her daughter, "Lila, do not do this. Please stay quiet." But Lila's eyes did not move from Mr. Rowland. She replied with courage, "I accept." The guests clapped, some cheered, and some laughed at the boldness of her answer. Mr. Rowland shook his head in amusement. He thought victory was certain, and he loved the idea of making the girl admit defeat in front of everyone. A servant quickly brought out a polished chessboard and set it on the table. The black and white pieces were placed neatly in their rows. The billionaire sat on one side with confidence, while Lila took her seat on the other side with calm determination. Mr. Rowland cracked his knuckles and smiled. "Win this and the fortune is yours." Lila placed her fingers on a pawn. Her hands were steady, her eyes bright. Nobody noticed the quiet confidence in her face, but inside her mind, a plan had already begun. The game was about to start. The chessboard sat between them, shining under the golden lights of the hall. The guests leaned closer, eager to watch the game. Some whispered that it would be over quickly, while others laughed at the boldness of a maid's daughter daring to challenge a billionaire. Mr. Rowland looked around with a smile. "This will be entertaining," he said. "A simple lesson for everyone about knowing their place." Lila said nothing. She studied the pieces in front of her, her eyes moving with care. She had played chess many times before, not with expensive boards like this, but with an old wooden set given by a kind librarian. The library had been her secret world. While other children played outside, Lila had sat for hours learning strategies, solving puzzles, and reading about great players. She was not afraid of the challenge. The guests expected her hands to shake, but when she reached for her pawn, her fingers were steady. She pushed it forward 2 squares. The game had begun. Mr. Rowland moved quickly, full of confidence. He made his moves without much thought, certain that he could crush a young girl without effort. Each time he placed a piece, he smirked as if he had already won, but Lila watched carefully. She did not rush. She thought about every move, her mind working quietly like a clock. She had learned patience from her books. She knew that chess was not about speed, but about foresight. Maria stood at the back of the room, her hands pressed together in worry. She could barely breathe as she watched her daughter face the richest man she had ever known. To her, this was not just a game. It was a dangerous risk. If Lila lost, the humiliation would stay with them forever. But her daughter sat calmly, as if she had been preparing for this all her life. The guests soon began to notice that something was unusual. The game was not ending quickly. Mr. Rowland captured a few of Lila's pawns, but in return he lost a knight and a bishop. His smile grew thinner with each move. One guest leaned toward another and whispered, "She is playing better than I thought." Another replied softly, "It must be luck. The end will come soon." But inside, some of them began to feel uneasy. The girl was not stumbling as they expected. Lila's strategy was clear in her mind. She was not playing for quick victory. She was building slowly, defending carefully, and waiting for the right moment. She remembered the words of a book she once read. A strong defense is the first step to victory. Mr. Rowland, however, grew impatient. He liked fast results. He pushed his queen forward too early, hoping to trap Lila. But the young girl spotted the danger and blocked it with precision. She even smiled slightly, though no one noticed. Minutes turned into half an hour. The large hall, once full of laughter and noise, grew quiet. The only sounds were the clink of chess pieces and the rustle of clothes as guests leaned forward to see the board. Mr. Rowland's face, once full of amusement, now showed hints of annoyance. He was not used to being challenged, especially not by a girl whose mother served in his house. He wanted to end it quickly, to prove his power. He moved his rook with force, slamming it against the board. Lila did not flinch. She moved her knight smoothly, countering his plan. She had seen that trap before in her puzzle books. The tension in the room grew heavy. Some guests who had been laughing now sat in silence. A few even found themselves quietly cheering for the girl, though they did not dare say it aloud. There was something inspiring about the way she held her ground against a man everyone feared. Maria, still standing at the back, felt her heart swell with both fear and pride. She had always known her daughter was clever, but seeing her face the billionaire with such calm strength filled her eyes with tears. Finally, Lila leaned back slightly, her eyes fixed on the board. She could see the path forming. It was still far, but she knew the steps. If she stayed steady, she could win. Mr. Rowland, however, mistook her calmness for weakness. He smirked again and said loudly, "Do you feel the pressure now, child? You cannot hold out forever. This is the difference between a ruler and a servant." Lila answered softly, "The game is not over yet." Her words sent a ripple through the hall. The guests sat even straighter, eager to see what would happen next. The pieces on the board told a story that none of them had expected. And for the first time that evening, a trace of doubt crossed Mr. Rowland's face. The game was only halfway through, but already the balance was shifting. The game continued, and the air in the grand hall felt heavier with each move. No one had expected the match to last this long. At first, the guests had laughed at the challenge, but now most of them sat in silence, watching carefully as if they were witnesses to something far more important than a game of chess. Mr. Rowland's fingers tapped impatiently on the table. He was used to winning, used to seeing others fold under his pressure. Yet this girl, the daughter of his maid, showed no fear. Her eyes were focused, her posture calm. Each time he tried to trap her, she found a way out. Each time he tried to force her hand, she moved in a way that surprised him. "Not bad," he said finally, trying to sound casual. "You have some skill. But you must understand, child. Experience matters more than courage. I have been winning all my life." Lila looked at the board. She did not answer. She pushed her pawn forward, supporting her knight. It was a simple move, but it gave her more control of the center of the board. The guests leaned closer. Some of them whispered quietly. "She is thinking several steps ahead," one said. Another nodded, adding, "Roland is attacking too quickly. He is leaving gaps." Mr. Roland noticed their whispers and frowned. He did not like the idea that people thought the girl was doing well. His pride was as valuable to him as his money. He straightened his shoulders and announced, "Watch now. This is how you end a game." With a strong motion, he moved his queen forward, aiming to put pressure on Lila's king. The move was aggressive, and several guests gasped. They thought the game might end at last, but Lila's eyes narrowed. She saw the trap, and she also saw the weakness in his formation. Calmly, she shifted her rook into place, protecting her pieces while also threatening his queen. The room grew tense again. Mr. Roland stared at the board. He had not expected that move. He pulled back his queen to safety, but in doing so, he lost the momentum he had tried to build. Lila continued her plan step by step. She did not rush. She advanced her pawns, strengthened her defense, and waited for her moment. She remembered the words she had once read. "Patience breaks even the strongest walls." Maria stood at the back of the hall, her hands clasped tightly. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. Her daughter was not only holding her ground but slowly turning the game in her favor. Pride filled her heart, yet fear still lingered. She knew Mr. Roland's temper. He would not take humiliation easily. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. The grand hall was quiet except for the clicking sound of pieces on the board. Guests who had come for food and laughter now found themselves unable to look away from the match. Some even forgot to sip their expensive drinks as they watched the young girl face the billionaire with unwavering focus. At last, the turning point arrived. Mr. Roland made a bold move with his rook, hoping to corner Lila's king. His eyes shone with confidence as he leaned back in his chair. "Check," he said firmly. Gasps filled the room. Maria's heart sank, but Lila's face did not change. She looked at the board carefully. The position seemed dangerous, but she had seen such situations before in her puzzle books. Quietly, she slid her bishop across the board. The move not only blocked the check, but also trapped Mr. Roland's rook. The guests erupted in whispers. Some even clapped before covering their mouths in shock. Mr. Roland's smile disappeared as he realized his mistake. He had given away a powerful piece, and there was no way to save it. Lila captured the rook on the next turn. Her position was stronger now, and her pieces worked together like a net closing in on a fish. Mr. Roland shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time that evening, sweat appeared on his forehead. One guest leaned to another and whispered, "This is not a joke anymore. She might actually win." Another guest, who had been silent all evening, nodded slowly. "She plays with calm. That is the sign of true strength." Mr. Roland heard the murmurs and slammed his hand on the table. "Silence," he barked. The room froze. He adjusted his suit and tried to regain his composure, but his confidence was shaken. He looked across the table at Lila, who sat as steady as ever. "You are lucky," he muttered, but even he did not believe his own words. Lila finally spoke. Her voice was calm but firm. "Luck does not last this long. This is strategy." Her words cut deeper than he expected. The guests, hearing her confidence, began to exchange looks. Something was happening in that room. Something no one had predicted. The game was not over yet, but the balance had shifted. For the first time in many years, Mr. Roland felt the shadow of defeat. And the one casting it was the daughter of his maid. The grand hall felt like a different place now. When the match began, the room was filled with laughter. But now silence ruled. Every eye was fixed on the board. The glow of the golden lights reflected off the chess pieces, and each move sounded louder than the last. Mr. Roland leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. His sharp eyes studied the board, searching for a way back into control. Yet his thoughts were clouded by pride. He was a man who had never accepted defeat, not in business, not in life. To lose to a maid's daughter was something he could not allow. Across from him, Lila sat calmly. Her back was straight, her hands steady. She seemed much older than her years in that moment. She did not think about the money. She did not think about the crowd. Her entire focus was on the board and the game unfolding in front of her. Maria watched from the edge of the room, her heart pounding. She whispered quiet prayers, afraid that at any moment her daughter might make a mistake. Yet every time Lila moved, Maria saw confidence, not fear. The guests whispered among themselves. "Roland looks nervous," one man muttered. Another replied, "The girl is too calm. She is dangerous." Mr. Roland finally moved his queen forward, trying to create pressure. His hand trembled slightly as he set the piece down. He looked up at Lila, waiting to see doubt in her eyes, but she only leaned forward and studied the new position. Slowly, she moved her knight. The piece landed softly on the board, but the impact was felt across the room. It blocked his queen and opened a new threat against his bishop. Gasps echoed through the hall. "She is forcing him back," one guest whispered. Mr. Roland's jaw tightened. He pulled his bishop back to safety, but doing so left his pawns weak. Lila saw it instantly. She pushed her pawn forward, creating pressure on the center of the board. The game was shifting further in her favor. Minutes passed like hours. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall was the only reminder of time moving forward. Mr. Roland wiped his forehead, his movements no longer smooth. He leaned back, then leaned forward again, restless and uneasy. The guests who had once laughed at the idea of a child playing against him now watched with serious eyes. Some even whispered encouragement under their breath for the girl. Something about her calm spirit touched them. She was not only playing for herself, but for every person who had ever been looked down upon. Mr. Roland finally tried to launch a new attack. He sacrificed a pawn, hoping to create a trap. He leaned closer and muttered, "Let us see if you are clever enough to spot this." Lila looked at the board. Her eyes moved from piece to piece. She had seen this pattern before. It was a common trick, one she had practiced many times while solving puzzles in the library. With quiet confidence, she moved her rook into position, breaking the trap before it could even begin. A wave of surprise went through the hall. Some guests clapped softly. Mr. Roland's face turned pale. "You read too much into this game," he said in a forced laugh, but no one in the room believed his tone. They could see the sweat on his brow, the tightness of his jaw, and the way his eyes darted across the board without focus. Lila answered in a calm voice, "A strong player does not only attack. A strong player thinks ahead." Her words stung. They carried more weight than her moves. The guests nodded, their respect for the young girl growing with each moment. Mr. Roland tried again, moving his queen to threaten her king. "Check," he declared loudly, as if trying to regain control. The hall tensed, but Lila did not panic. She slid her bishop across the board. With one graceful move, she blocked the check and at the same time forced his queen into retreat. Whispers rose among the guests again. "She has turned the pressure back on him." Maria felt her chest tighten, but this time it was with pride. She wiped her eyes quietly, her heart swelling as she watched her daughter stand tall in a room full of power. The game pressed on. Piece by piece, Lila tightened her grip. Mr. Roland lost another knight, then a pawn. His position grew weaker while hers grew stronger. Finally, Lila lifted her rook and set it firmly on the board. The move trapped Mr. Roland's queen, leaving him with no choice but to lose his most powerful piece. The room erupted in gasps. Some guests even stood, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Mr. Roland's face went pale, his lips pressed tightly together. He had lost his queen to the maid's daughter, and the game was slipping from his control. The queen, the most powerful piece on the board, was gone. Mr. Roland stared at the empty square where his queen had stood only moments earlier. His fingers twitched as if he still held it. For a man who ruled through power and control, losing his strongest piece to a child felt like an insult sharper than any word. The room buzzed with whispers. Some guests shook their heads, others leaned closer to the board, unable to believe their eyes. "Did you see that?" "She trapped his queen," one man said in amazement. Another added softly, "She is not just lucky. She knows exactly what she is doing." Maria pressed her hands together tightly. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. She could not let anyone see her weakness. Instead, she focused on her daughter's face. calm and steady like water flowing in a quiet river. Mr. Rowland tried to hide his unease with a forced laugh. "A mistake," he said loudly, his voice echoing across the hall. "Even masters make mistakes. Do not think this little success will last." But the guests did not respond with laughter this time. Their expressions were serious. Some even began to look at Lila with respect. The power in the room was shifting. The same people who had once mocked her were now watching her with admiration. Lila did not answer Mr. Rowland's words. She kept her eyes on the board. Her next move was simple, pushing a pawn forward to support her rook. But to those who understood the game, it was a strong step that tightened her control. Mr. Rowland leaned closer, his eyes scanning the board desperately. He tried to launch another attack with his remaining pieces, but his strategy was broken. Without his queen, his position was weaker, and Lila's pieces were united like soldiers marching in order. The hall grew quieter with each turn. The only sounds were the clink of pieces and the faint ticking of the wall clock. The guests leaned forward, holding their breath at every move. Some even began to whisper to each other that they wished the girl would win. "Do you see her composure?" one woman whispered. "She is not afraid of him." "Yes," another replied, "and he cannot stand it." Mr. Rowland noticed their whispers. His face flushed red with anger. He had built his life on fear and respect. For the first time, those who usually bowed to him were admiring someone else. He slammed his hand on the table and glared at the crowd. "Do not forget who I am," he barked. The guests fell silent, but their eyes betrayed their thoughts. They no longer looked at him with the same admiration. Lila looked up, meeting his angry stare. Her voice was calm as she said, "A game is not won by anger. It is won by patience and focus." The word struck him harder than any move on the board. His hand trembled as he reached for his knight. But before he could place it, he realized that whichever square he chose, she would gain an advantage. At last he moved it weakly, placing it far from the action. Lila wasted no time. She moved her bishop forward, pinning one of his rooks in place. He gritted his teeth. Piece by piece, his army was shrinking. Her plan was clear, and he could not stop it. Maria covered her mouth with her hand, her heart swelling with pride. She had never seen her daughter so powerful. Lila's calmness was like a shield, unbroken even under the weight of Mr. Rowland's glare. As the minutes stretched into an hour, the guests began to lean toward Lila's side. Some whispered, "She is going to win." Others nodded, saying, "The game belongs to her now." Mr. Rowland's breathing grew heavy. His suit, once neat, was now wrinkled from his restless movements. He wiped his forehead with a handkerchief, his composure slipping away. For the first time in years, he looked vulnerable. Lila moved her rook with steady hands, delivering another blow. His last rook was trapped. He sighed and gave it up, his eyes burning with frustration. The room erupted again with whispers. Some guests even dared to clap softly before stopping themselves. The atmosphere had changed. When the challenge began, everyone had expected a quick and humiliating defeat for the girl. Now they were watching history being made. Mr. Rowland leaned back in his chair, pale and tired, his eyes fixed on the girl across the board. She looked back at him, not with pride, not with mockery, but with quiet determination. In that silence, the truth became clear to everyone in the room. The billionaire who had once laughed at a maid's daughter was losing to her, and there was little he could do to stop it. The crowd had shifted. Their faith was no longer with him. It was with her. The tension in the grand hall was unbearable. Every guest leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the chessboard. Each move Lila made seemed to tighten the invisible net around Mr. Rowland's pieces. The air was heavy, filled with the sound of silent gasps and the faint ticking of the clock. Mr. Rowland's face had lost its usual confidence. He moved his remaining knight nervously, hoping to create some distraction or opportunity, but Lila's calm gaze followed every piece. She had anticipated his plan. Every square he tried to use was already under her careful control. Maria, standing at the back, felt her hand shake with a mixture of fear and pride. She had never imagined her daughter could face such power and not falter. Lila's determination shone brighter than any jewel in the hall. Every move she made was precise, measured, and deliberate. The guests exchanged whispers. "She is brilliant," one man said. "I have never seen anyone play like this," replied another. They had come expecting entertainment, perhaps a quick laugh at the girl's expense. Instead, they witnessed skill, patience, and courage. Mr. Rowland leaned back in his chair, trying to hide the worry in his eyes. "This is impossible," he muttered under his breath. He glanced around at the audience, searching for support, but everyone's attention was on Lila. The power in the room had shifted. For the first time, he felt the weight of someone else's control. Lila moved her bishop, threatening his king. The movement was subtle, almost delicate, but it was deadly. Mr. Rowland's eyes widened as he realized the danger. His king had very few safe squares left. He tried to defend with his rook, but the path was blocked. "She is closing in," one guest whispered, holding their breath. The billionaire's pride made him act hastily. He moved his pawn forward to create space, but the move backfired. Lila immediately captured it with her queen. Her control was absolute. The guest murmurs grew louder. Some even clapped softly in admiration. Maria's heart raced. She had never seen her daughter so calm under pressure. Lila's eyes were focused, her fingers steady as they hovered over the pieces. She did not rush. She did not falter. Every move was part of a plan, and her plan was now within reach of victory. Mr. Rowland tried another attack, this time with his remaining rook. He moved it with force, hoping to intimidate Lila into making a mistake. But she simply adjusted her knight, blocking the threat and leaving him in a weaker position than before. The room was silent now. Even the staff who worked in the mansion had stopped moving. Everyone who had entered the hall to watch a game now watched a masterclass in strategy. The odds had shifted completely. Mr. Rowland's breathing became heavy. His forehead was damp with sweat. He tried to calculate a way to escape, but every piece he had was trapped or threatened. His arrogance had failed him. He realized that this was no ordinary challenge. This was a test of skill, patience, and intelligence that he could not overpower with money or authority. Lila leaned forward slightly. Her hand moved a pawn carefully, controlling the board even more. Her movements were quiet, but each one spoke louder than any words. She was in control now. The game was hers to win. Finally, she slid her rook across the board with calm precision. The rook trapped Mr. Rowland's king in a corner, and no move could save him. Checkmate. The room exploded with whispers, claps, and gasps. Some guests jumped to their feet, unable to believe what had just happened. The billionaire, who had laughed at a maid's daughter only hours before, now sat pale, his hands clenched tightly on the table. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Maria ran forward, tears streaming down her face. She could hardly speak. She hugged her daughter tightly, proud beyond words. Lila smiled gently, keeping her composure even as the room celebrated around her. The guests looked at her in awe. A young girl had defeated one of the richest and most powerful men in the country. The balance of respect, authority, and admiration had shifted completely. Mr. Rowland finally found his voice, but it was quiet and shaky. I underestimated you," he admitted, his pride wounded but his words honest. He stared at the board and then at Lila. "You are remarkable." Lila simply nodded, her eyes calm. "Thank you. It was only a game. But every game teaches something." The room remained silent for a few seconds, absorbing the scene. Then slowly applause filled the hall. Not mocking applause, but real admiration. People were witnessing a moment that would be remembered for years. In that quiet victory, Lila had shown more than skill. She had shown courage, patience, and intelligence. And she had done it without fear. The game was over. But the story was only beginning. The applause in the grand hall echoed for several moments before slowly fading into silence. Mr. Rowland sat back in his chair, pale and thoughtful. For the first time in his life, he had been outsmarted, and not by another billionaire or a business rival, but by a young girl whose mother served in his mansion. His face, once full of pride and laughter, now showed astonishment and a quiet respect he had never felt before. Lila sat calmly, her hands folded in her lap. She had played carefully, strategically, and with patience. Every move had been planned, every decision deliberate. Her victory was not just about the chess game. It was about proving that intelligence and courage could come from anywhere. Maria rushed to her daughter, embracing her tightly. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "I am so proud of you. Lila, you have done something amazing." Lila smiled softly, her eyes reflecting both joy and humility. The guests, who had once been amused by the challenge, now looked at Lila with admiration. Some whispered to each other, praising her skill and courage. Others stared at Mr. Rowland, who had lost both the game and the comfort of his usual control. The balance of power in the room had shifted. Mr. Rowland finally stood, clearing his throat. His voice was firm, but there was a hint of humility in it. "I underestimated you, Lila," he admitted. "You have shown intelligence, patience, and courage. You have earned respect today, more than I have ever seen from anyone I have faced before." Lila looked at him, her gaze calm but confident. "Thank you, sir. I only did what I could. The game taught me much, and I hope it has reminded everyone here that everyone has potential, no matter where they come from." A murmur of agreement spread through the room. Some of the guests nodded. Others looked surprised, realizing the truth in her words. In that moment, the young girl had not only won a game, she had earned the admiration of an entire audience. Mr. Rowland walked toward the chessboard and knelt slightly to shake Lila's hand. The gesture was simple but powerful. It was not just about acknowledging the loss. It was about showing respect to someone who had proven herself through skill and determination. "You have a brilliant mind," he said quietly, "and I am pleased to give you the reward I promised." The word sent a wave of surprise and excitement through the hall. Lila's eyes widened slightly, but she remained composed. She had not expected the billionaire to honor his promise so quickly, but she had always believed in fairness and honesty. The room was filled with a sense of awe. Guests who had once doubted her abilities now looked at her with respect. Even the staff of the mansion, who had watched quietly from the edges, felt pride for her courage and skill. Maria held her daughter's hand tightly, unable to stop smiling. "You have changed everything today, Lila, not just for yourself, but for all of us who believed in you." Lila nodded, understanding the weight of her actions. Her victory was bigger than a chess game. It was a lesson in courage, intelligence, and persistence. Mr. Rowland returned to his seat but looked at her with newfound admiration. "You have taught me something valuable," he said softly. "Sometimes wisdom comes from places we least expect. Today you have reminded me that true talent is not measured by wealth or status, but by skill, courage, and focus." Lila smiled gently, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had faced a challenge that many thought impossible, and had proven herself through determination and patience. The hall, filled with silence and respect, seemed to acknowledge her victory in every glance and gesture. As the guests slowly began to leave, they carried with them the story of the day a young girl had defeated a billionaire in chess. They would remember not only her skill but her courage and her calm confidence. Maria and Lila walked to the door together. "Thank you for standing strong, Lila," Maria said. "You have shown everyone that nothing is impossible if we believe in ourselves." Lila looked at her mother and nodded. "I only did what I had to do, Mother. But yes, today has changed something for everyone who saw it." Outside, the sun was beginning to set. The golden light reflected off the mansion's walls, shining brighter than ever. Inside, a lesson had been learned, a challenge had been conquered, and a young girl had earned respect in a way no one could have predicted. The game was over, but its impact would last far longer than anyone in the room could imagine. The hall was quiet, but the energy lingered. Every guest who had witnessed the game felt the weight of what had just happened. A young girl had defeated one of the richest and most powerful men in the country, not with wealth, not with force, but with intelligence, patience, and courage. Mr. Rowland sat in his large chair, still pale from the shock of his loss. He stared at the chessboard, then at Lila, and finally at the crowd. The usual pride that filled him had shifted to something unfamiliar: respect. He had promised a reward, and now he had to honor it. "You have earned it," he said slowly, his voice calm but firm. "I promised a reward if you won, and I will keep my word." Lila's eyes widened slightly, but she remained composed. She had known he was a man of his word, but seeing the billionaire's serious expression made it real. She nodded politely. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice steady. A staff member quickly brought a large envelope to the table. Mr. Rowland handed it to Lila. The envelope was thick and heavy, filled with documents confirming the transfer of $100 million to her name. It was more money than she could have ever imagined. Yet Lila did not smile in greed. She took the envelope carefully, aware of the responsibility it carried. The guests watched silently. Some whispered among themselves, amazed that the promise had been kept. Others stared at Mr. Rowland, realizing that his honor had not been diminished despite the loss. He had shown that fairness mattered, even in the world of immense wealth. Maria ran forward and hugged her daughter tightly. "I cannot believe this, Lila," she whispered. "You have done something no one thought possible." Tears ran down her face, but they were tears of pride, joy, and relief. Lila hugged her mother back, smiling softly. "We only do what we can, Mother. I could not have done it without everything you taught me about patience and focus." Mr. Rowland rose from his chair and walked slowly around the table. He looked at Lila carefully. "You have not only won a game," he said, "but you have reminded everyone here that skill and courage are what truly matter. Money cannot replace intelligence, and power cannot replace patience. Today, you have shown all of us what true strength looks like." The crowd in the hall clapped this time, not in mockery, but in admiration. Some stood up, nodding to Lila as a sign of respect. Even those who had been doubtful now realized they had witnessed something extraordinary. Lila placed the envelope carefully in her bag. She felt the weight of the responsibility, but also the importance of the lesson. Winning was not just about money. It was about courage, strategy, and believing in oneself when no one else did. Mr. Rowland smiled faintly, a new expression on his face. "Perhaps I have underestimated others too often," he admitted. "Today you have taught me that respect must be earned through action, not assumed by status." The guests began to leave, talking quietly among themselves. The story of Lila's victory would travel far beyond the walls of the mansion. People would speak of the girl who faced a billionaire, remained calm under pressure, and won with intelligence and patience. Maria held Lila's hand as they walked toward the exit. The sun was setting, casting warm golden light across the grounds of the mansion. It felt like the world itself was acknowledging her victory. Lila looked back at the hall once more. She thought about the game, the strategy, and the courage it had taken to face such a challenge. "I will always remember this day," she said softly to her mother. Maria smiled. "And everyone else will remember it too. You have shown the world that anyone, no matter where they come from, can achieve great things with focus and courage." Mr. Rowland watched them leave. He returned to the chessboard, now empty except for the few remaining pieces. A quiet smile appeared on his face. He had been defeated, but he had learned an invaluable lesson. True power is not measured by wealth alone, but by the mind and the heart behind every action. As Lila and Maria walked down the steps of the mansion, the golden sunlight reflected off the walls. The game was over, the reward was secured, and a new chapter in their lives had begun. Lila had won more than a fortune. She had won respect, honor, and the proof that courage and intelligence could overcome any obstacle. And in that moment, the world seemed a little brighter, a little fairer, and full of possibility.